Welcome, friends. I'm Kevin McLean. So, a significant factor to the Indo-European spread was their specific style of warfare, and that is the hit-and-run style raiding tactics that were implemented specifically in relation to the horse. Now, before the horse, it was difficult to carry out these kinds of raids, because if you attack a settlement or another community, then you face a serious repercussion. That is, they are going to fight back. Now, once you might initiate the attack with the element of surprise, but after that initial surprise wears off and you try to make your escape, then of course they will pursue you. With the horse, this changes, because you can target, even if the enemy has horses, you can target those horses, steal them, or drive them off. At the initiation of the raid, you can carry out your raid, and then you can retreat on your own horses before the enemy can react against you, and without the enemy's ability to catch you. So it takes away a lot of the element of retaliation in these types of attacks, and it is probable that this style of raiding warfare was very important to the Indo-European domination of agriculturalist groups in Europe. Now, this ultimately, I think, ties into the type of mythology which develops in Europe. So if we look at the power relations demonstrated within the Indo-European pantheon of gods, we see that agricultural deities, or deities of the land, are usually feminine, or they are an underclass of deity. In Celtic sources, in fact, none of the Tua Dadanan are agricultural gods. They may have powers related to agriculture, but they do not carry out agricultural work. This was something done by slaves, and it's presented as such in the mythology as well. So Lugh, for instance, plays an important role in the harvest myth, but it is specifically not as the harvester. It is actually as a type of thief. And this relates ultimately to the Indo-European lifestyle, at least during the Bronze Age. Now, once you get into the later Iron Age, of course, they are also engaging in agriculture, but nevertheless this aristocratic ideal survives, and it survives in Irish, and it survives even in Greek sources. So the primary examples of this as expressed in mythology, we can look at gods like Indra, Lugh, you can look at Zeus even, Odin. Now these gods have a common theme. So take Indra for example. He is fundamentally a warrior god. He is a god of the sky, ultimately, but he is a warrior, and he is petitioned often for victory in battle. But he's also petitioned very often for wealth, for cattle, horses, even women. All things which early Indo-European peoples fought to obtain during raids. And various hymns credit Indra with actually fulfilling these requests, in some cases even giving 1,000 horses. So Indra almost certainly provided these horses through giving victory in a raid. So Indra has a sort of ambivalent nature to him. He is called a lawgiver, the observer of law, the enforcer of laws, and the supreme god of heaven, etc. But he is also presented as a thief. He steals soma from the gods. He steals the sun wheel of the chariot of the sun. So he has this sort of ambivalent thieving character to him. And he's also multi-skilled. He's skilled in everything. We see the same dynamic with Lugh. He is this trickster figure. And in Welsh myth, the figure of Gwydion very likely carries on this same kind of idea, because he goes down south to the land governed by Pryderi. Pryderi is the son of, effectively, the Lord of the Underworld. Puss is called Lord of Anuvan, which is the Underworld. And the difference between him and Araun is they are effectively almost one and the same. So he goes down to the Underworld and effectively tricks them out of their wealth. He steals the pigs, the wealth of the Underworld, and brings them north to the upper world. Now Pryderi comes to fight for these, and he is defeated in battle by Gwydion in single combat. This is the same sort of thieving myth, related in some way to the harvest, related to the acquiring of wealth. Now we can trace this very idea back to exactly probably what the Proto-Indo-Europeans were doing when they were spreading across Europe. That is, they would come across agricultural settlements, they would raid them, and they would steal the harvest. They would probably wait until harvest time. It's not like they were fools. They knew when these things were going on. They just waited for all the farmers to do all their work, and then they would ride into town and take it all by force. Now, although the story presents itself as if the Fomorians have stolen the crops, and they are simply trying to get them back or trying to maintain what they already have, it seems like there is an underlying earlier myth, and this has somehow been changed for more, for a different set of moral standards in a different era. Because in the dynamic between Lugh and Balor, it very much presents Balor as an agrarian type figure. Lugh calls him a peasant. Balor says, or seems to say, something along the lines of that Lugh is coming to encounter the seeds that he Balor had sowed. And Lugh seems to lay claim to those things by saying that he was the one who brought floods to the fields, and therefore they really belong to him. So it's presenting the dynamic of a sky god versus the god of the earth or the underworld that are squabbling over who gets to control this wealth. Balor is making the argument that it belongs to them because it came up from them, they did the planting. Lugh calls him a stupid peasant. And so it is to be understood on many different levels. One, it's a class thing, that the peasant does the work, does the agrarian labor. In Celtic society, this was not done by free men. Free men did not do agricultural labor. They would have women do it. They would have slaves do it. They would have, the underclass do it. Nobles did not engage in farm work. This is something different from the more southern European peoples, who kept more of the original Neolithic traditions. This is the embodiment of the aristocratic tradition of the Indo-Europeans. They are warriors. They are skilled in arts and such, but they are not farmers. And the Celtic tradition maintains this perfectly, especially with the high pantheon of gods, which does not include any agrarian god. Now, this conflict is to resolve this. So they are fighting for the produce of the land. Lugh says that Balor cannot take any of the produce, nor the nuts from trees. And so this is fundamentally a dynamic between both the upper class and the peasantry. but also one could see it as hearkening back to the original dynamic between the incoming Indo-European peoples conflicting with the original inhabitants, the Neolithic farmers. So this is why I say it's difficult to say whether this actually reflects a common Indo-European idea about how these gods related to the earth, or whether it's intertwined also with the social dynamic that was taking place in all of these different places, whether it was Greece, whether it was India. They're encountering these different people who were basically settled farmers, and they themselves are raiding pastoralists. So their gods reflect their traditions, and the agrarian peoples would have had the agrarian type of gods. So this is why I think many people argue that this dynamic shows it reflects in some way at least not only the religious conception but also the social conception, and the two are basically inseparable. The way that they saw the world was the same way in which they lived. So very interesting dynamic, because we have Indra, who's very similar to Lugh, as I've pointed out in various videos. We also have Zeus, who is basically fulfilling the same sort of role. He is overcoming this previous god who's also related to the harvest, who's related to agriculture in some way, Kronos. And he is, like, his weapon, for instance, is the sickle, right? Now, most of this is lost in the Greek tradition, right? Because it becomes syncretized with a lot of pre-Indo-European stuff. And this happens in most of the Mediterranean European traditions. They blend in more. But in northern traditions, it seems there was less blending, or at least in the Celtic tradition, it seems there's actually less blending, even though some people have argued that there's more blending in the Celtic tradition. I really don't see it. Now, we see this dynamic also with Odin. Odin, also a war god, a sky god, who's the celestial order, who leads a battle of the gods with other gods who are seen as being linked to the earth and agrarian pursuits. So in every single situation there is this dynamic. Does it go back to some sort of original conception of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or is it simply that they're all similar because those people, when they went to these places, had or encountered or partook in the same sorts of social processes that led to the development of these stories because they reflected their social reality, right? So our gods are reflecting, ourselves, and the other gods, are reflecting the other people that we're encountering. Our gods conquer their gods. Their gods, of course, are going to be more agrarian because they are agrarian people. They are farmers. Our gods reflect war, reflect skills and trades. Zeus seems to do exactly the same types of things. So he's a warrior god. He grants victory in battle, right? This becomes somewhat lost later, but it's more clear in the earlier sources like the Iliad. In the Iliad, it's very clear he's the one who will ultimately decide who wins in the war, right? It's all up to him. And the whole drama that ensues is the work of poetic fiction, right? But it is ultimately Zeus who is the convener of battles, and he who also convenes the clouds, he who is also the wily son of Kronos, right? There is always this tricky element. And of all of the figures in Greek myth, Zeus is by far presented as the trickiest god. He is conniving, he has secret plans, he is always going around in disguise, right? This very similar as Odin, very similar as Lugh. So all of these gods have this sort of element to them, that they're somehow ambiguous morally. And this is to do with the sort of order of the cosmos, right? The order is neither good nor bad. It is neutral. Good things happen, bad things happen, according to the cosmic order. And the person who rules over that order and enforces that order, the supreme god of the sky, is ultimately then ambiguous as to his moral nature, because he doesn't necessarily care about the individual human being. He cares about the overall control and governance of the world, right? This is why you might even in ancient society pray more directly to a more localized spirit, your own ancestor or something, who would then act as an intermediary. Now, these gods, in at least some places, were also linked to the cult of the wolf. So Odin, of course, famously has 2 wolves. Lugh is linked to hounds or wolves in various cases, of course, through his son as well. And Zeus is also linked to myths about werewolves and is called Zeus the Wolf in some cases. Although some people dispute that, they say it's only related to the place name, but I think the local lore about the werewolf sort of really does emphasize that in some very archaic period it did relate in some way to an actual wolf. But the original myth is sort of lost. But I think that this relates to the Indo-European tradition of the wolf warrior. So the warrior band as emulating the style of the wolf pack. And that these people would go out and raid and attack and take over places. I think this is the relation. It certainly seems to be the relation shared by Lugh, who leads the warrior band and is thus associated with these wolves and is called a bloody wolf in various sources. So that this god is not only the sky god, he is also the god of the warriors. And the reason why, perhaps at least, one of the reasons that this god becomes the primary god of the Indo-Europeans is because he was the god of the warriors who were spreading out throughout Europe, right? Who are these warriors going to be praying to the most when they're engaging in raiding warfare? They're going to be praying to the god who governs this action. And so he, to these people who establish themselves as the elites in various areas, their main god is going to be the god who grants them victory in battle. And that it is Zeus, that is Odin, that is Lugh. In Roman myth also, right, it's Mars who is the progenitor of the Roman state. Mars is the father of Romulus and Remus. And so he has the direct role in founding the entire Roman people, not Jupiter. So to sum up, I think it's very likely that these myths were influenced by the direct social experience of Indo-Europeans as they were moving and establishing themselves in different places. That doesn't mean necessarily that all of these other gods associated with agrarian activity were necessarily direct representations of pre-Indo-European gods. But it is possible that the way that it's framed within myth is a reflection of that social dynamic. There is also the dynamic between Bress and Lugh, where Bress says that if they till, sow, and reap on a Tuesday, that it will be good fortune for them. Now, it doesn't. Some people have said, well, he's teaching the Tuatha De Danann and how to do agriculture. But this doesn't seem to be the case. Instead, it seems more likely that what is going on is that he is not so much telling them how to do agriculture, but saying that he is going to look after the agriculture in some way. that he is going to be responsible for that agriculture, because they are not going to do it, right? Agriculture is the work of slaves, and so the high gods are not going to engage in manual labor. They are going to get their slaves to do it. And elsewhere it seems that Bress operates as a kind of slave of Lugh in other stories. He's digging holes for him, for instance. And the interesting thing, another interesting thing, is that Bress is killed by Lugh by being poisoned by bog water. But this bog water is actually supposed to be milk. So Lugh makes 300 cows out of wood and then fills them with bog water, supposedly, and then has Bress drink it because he's obligated to accept anything that is offered to him to drink. So this kills him, this bog water. But is it bog water originally? Or is it in fact some sort of weird remembrance of people who are lactose intolerant, right? The incoming Indo-Europeans had developed tolerance for drinking milk and eating cheese and things like this. But the farmer people in Europe at that time still hadn't developed lactose tolerance. So if they had been fed milk and cheese and stuff, it would have poisoned them. So is this actually some sort of remembrance of this dynamic between people who couldn't consume milk? And Lugh is elsewhere said to put milk in cattle. Specifically, in folklore especially, this is made to be a very important factor. In fact, he doesn't just put milk in cattle, he puts milk in women. If he apparently goes near a woman, she will burst forth in milk, right? Similar things are said about Indra as well. So there is this quality, perhaps, that is linking Lugh to milk, and perhaps these agrarian people, because Bress is ultimately a representative of the more agrarian people, I think, that he is representative of those people that is being poisoned by milk. This is just some far out theory, right? But it's at least plausible. Anyhow, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please check out our Patreon channel, give us some support, and please share, like this video. Gurv Mila Magat, Haseis Jack, Agus Marigoni, Shas Gohar.